Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news. Yes, today we have a very special guest, Dr. Hank Thurston. He's out of Elko, and we're going to be talking about a myriad of issues, mostly surrounding AI. We've all been hearing about it in the news, but we don't quite know how it's going to play out on the ground. Well, Dr. Hank Thurston has one of the first AI companies here in Nevada, and we're going to talk about what he's doing. And then my project outside of the 775 Alive podcast, I have several businesses. One of them's working on a water patent, and Hank helped me out. I should say, should I call you Dr. Thurston?
Whatever you like.
Okay, you're so personable. I always lend myself to Hank.
Never been accused of that before, so thank you.
And it's so rare to encounter an engineer that is personable and easy to talk to. So I apologize if I'm being unprofessional. But so Hank, how long has that AI company been open in Elko? It's pretty recent, isn't it?
Well, so I think to call us an AI company isn't fully accurate.
Okay.
Certainly not for Thurston Laboratories. For my other company, Anthracene Softworks, while we're not strictly AI, we actually have done some really cool AI work. And yeah, we've been around for 2 years. I think we incorporated October 31st in 23. So
Yeah. So as a business person, a lot of times when you're working in the field and you have systems projects, there's so many different ways you can assemble a system. And prior to AI modeling, what you would have to do is design a protocol and test it and try to get as many variables in as possible. It could cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And the timelines can be years on those things. So AI modeling, which is what you did for my company, go ahead and go through all the data sets possible and come out with a matrix of data that helps you figure out how to advance your technology. Do you think that's a good way to describe it?
I do. I think there's one step that you jumped over, though.
Okay.
So you've got, at the most basic, your physical prototype, right? Let's build something and see if it works. And that has certainly been made easier by things like sintering technology and 3D printing, but that's still a very expensive, time-consuming process. Then, yeah, we've got the very cutting edge using AI to help design these things. But there's a big step in the middle that we've been using for decades, which is instead of building a physical prototype, let's build that prototype in silico in the computer and see what happens. And that really aligns more with the work that we did on your water project. It is not so much that we're using any like state-of-the-art AI in there. We were solving some equations that have been known for, in some cases, centuries, that are very, very hard to solve, and just using computers to solve them in very efficient ways.
Yeah. So this application, I imagine we started with my water project, and just as an example to people listening, there's a wide range of temperatures that my technology can operate at, and there's a wide range of environmental
variables.
Thank you. That it has to encounter. And so you ran a model of how it would operate, the efficiency of my water technology under those different variables. Do you imagine your company applying this to the mining industry to make us even more efficient?
So I don't know specifically that we'll do any work with the mines. The mines and mining engineers certainly do similar work. By similar, I mean use finite elements and these different solving processes to solve these very complex equations. In their case, looking at things like slope stability and maybe predicting ore veins, whatever they do there. I don't necessarily know that myself or either of my companies will get involved in that. We do some work with the mines for like quality control stuff. I don't know that there's a need for us to get involved in that because they've got their own, very well-trained staff that has all of these tools at their disposal to run these simulations and get the results they need. Some places where we have done some of this work is, and I think this is something that's probably of interest to Scott, is using AI to help uncover some of these historical artifacts that maybe we can't recover otherwise. And I can talk about that in a minute. And then also financial markets is where our company has done some work. Anthracene Softworks has towards using AI to help better inform trading decisions.
Oh, wow, Scott, I didn't even think about the historical application.
Yeah, we'll talk about that because Hank and I both up here in Elko, we work closely together on a range of projects. So we've talked about this a couple times. But I do want to jump back because you bring up an interesting point here with the mining industry, and some of your early statements. So the concept of model building, right, where you replicate mathematically, in particular, a physical process. Of course, that goes back centuries, right? When I used to teach the scientific revolution, that string that goes from Copernicus having the theory, Brahe collecting the data, Kepler building the model for orbital dynamics. So this is ancient. You mentioned that computers have made this easier because you can process more data, right? And some of this stuff we're seeing in mining and whatnot, or my past life experience back in the 90s, we did some data modeling in Georgia when I worked in engineering for tiebacks, right? Metal tieback rods for steep slopes or vertical
Sure.
concrete block walls, right? Developing up a way that we could more quickly analyze that based on structural steel dynamics and stuff like that. But what's interesting about that is you seem to be making a distinction between that type of model building and what we call AI. And I find that interesting because you also have some companies on the other side trying to suppress some of the fear about AI by saying, "Oh, we've been using AI for decades. Running the spell check is AI," and it's like, is that really AI? Just comparing a word with a
So
dictionary.
that's interesting.
They're
When
both
I
predictive modeling, right?
say that again,
They're both predictive modeling, right?
yeah, I think that that's fair to say.
Okay.
Um, and it's interesting because that kind of leads us, I think, into a discussion of a definition of what is AI.
Mm-hmm.
And several years ago, I co-founded a financial investment company that I'm not a part of anymore, although they're still going strong and doing great things. Trinary Capital, if you want to check them out. But we had to file some paperwork with the SEC because the SEC is getting really worried about AI. They don't like AI being used in trading.
The
And
Securities Exchange Commission.
yes,
Okay.
yep. And so even like the AI trading platforms that Anthracene Softworks has worked on, those can't be used for retail investors. If those are used at all by a company like Trinity Capital, would have to be used for like running a private hedge fund or something. The SEC will not allow that technology into the hands of retail investors yet.
I was wondering if that's a liability issue, right? Somebody in a hedge fund, a private equity sort of market, assumes the risk for using that, and it's no different if they run the numbers themselves. But once you jump over into a retail market where that end user doesn't have the access to the data model, it seems like that would increase liability drastically.
Hmm.
Maybe that's part of it. I think it's the SEC wanting to protect the retail investor who maybe doesn't have necessarily the knowledge to know to look into that or to dig into that or the time to do it. Whereas they would think that the
I hadn't even thought about it in the financial industry, but I have worked in the financial sector under the Forex trading market and the Bitcoin exchange. And one thing we had a problem with the bot traders is they're so much faster than human traders, and you can cause kind of a sell off, and they execute so quickly that it looks like a market drop when it might just be auto trading going on. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, but that's an interesting thing to think about because it really does make it unfair for the retail trader that's trying to enter a manual trade.
yeah, and that's another problem that isn't exclusive to AI or bots. And Scott, maybe you can remember this better than I can, but I think in the mid 80s there was a crash of the silver market because of high frequency trading that was
Mhm.
being facilitated by like fax machine infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And even that was sufficient to cause some of those same problems.
Well, more directly, I mean, that was one of the things that came up a couple years ago in the Robinhood scheme, right? Where they were able to use social media messaging to encourage mass buys or
Hmm.
mass sell-offs, right? Well, it gets to the thing. So, I mean, I think this is an important issue because Crystal and I, of course, in previous episodes on AI, have talked about, basically what concerns me is what's the definition of intelligence. But one of the things that always got me about this when I used to teach, again, talking about the scientific revolution, and particularly by this time getting into imperialism, the role of technology, and understanding, if we can borrow terms from the computer world, that technology can be divided historically into two parts. There's what we might call the hardware, right? Which is, the new gun, the new vaccine, whatnot. And then there's the software, how that is actually implemented into a particular society. And in some ways, that's what I'm thinking about. Again, model building, communication, looking for market variations that you can jump into. We'll get to the pamphlet set issue in a minute because that's fascinating. But all those are software. They're based on the society and how the society runs it. The technology behind it, I mean, computers can run the data numbers much quicker, right? But like on Crystal's project, adjusting for luminosity of the sun, periods of daylight, temperature variations, we could do that manually. It would just take forever, right?
Mhm.
So there's nothing new there. The question is how this is implemented into the society.
Yeah, that adoption is going to be key, and something that I'm interested in with AI is it's starting to seem like it gives you such advantage that you can't do without it. So me as a business person, I've been forced onto AI just because, 5 hours of research can now just take 30 minutes if you know how to inquire to an AI. And if all my competitors are doing the same thing, I really can't afford to do the old way of doing things. And same with the financial markets. Can you afford to manually trade, or do you need your own AI bot? So what's curious to me is, along with the cultural adoption, is it almost to the point where it's like owning a horse and buggy in the time of a car. Everyone's got to have a car now. Like everyone's got to have an AI. Does that sound like where you think it would be headed?
Probably, I think with AI, we probably are where we were with the internet in 1990.
Hmm.
It was this thing that by then I think everybody kind of knew about, but nobody really knew what to do with yet or how it would influence society yet. Whereas now, I mean, by and large, we can't really think of our life without the internet and all those things that the internet has spawned or otherwise made possible, like social media, like you know, um, apps like Snapchat and WhatsApp and all these other methods of communication that would have never been thought of 30 years ago.
And Hank, with what's really fascinating to me is in an emerging market, when people like you pop up, you've obviously gone to school and got a degree in it. You have a PhD in computer modeling, is that right?
Computational mathematics.
Okay. And so most of us are just starting to hear about AI. So I'm curious, in your story, what made you choose that as your degree pathway, and what made you decide to open up the company? Because in that story is kind of the backstory of AI, and it's the part I didn't see. What made you come on board?
So that's a bit of a circuitous path and not one that I would have predicted even 15 years ago or 10 years ago, probably. So I got out of the Marine Corps, which I went into after high school, and figured I had to do something. So I thought, well, I'll pursue civil engineering. That seems to be kind of what I'd like. So I went to Gonzaga to do that, and I was doing well at it. But the further I got into civil engineering, I kind of started to get frustrated with the way we were being taught to think. At the same time, we were required to take a number of physics courses, and the first physics course I had to take was a calc-based physics 103. And to this day, that's still the lowest grade on my transcript, and that just irritated me because none of the material was that hard. I shouldn't be struggling with the way I was. But I had a really good professor who was really good at turning that frustration into motivation. Um, and so I was registering for classes my second year or whatever, and looking at it and thought, well, it's like 3 classes to get a minor in physics. I may as well do that, just to show I have some mastery of this material now. So I declared that minor, and the more and more I got into physics, the more and more solace I found there compared to the frustrations I was having with engineering, just in the way that you were taught to think.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example of that, I think, is, well, in general, in engineering, and I understand there's some subtlety here in real life practicing engineers, maybe it's a little bit less cut and dry than this, but certainly in the educational setting, the way we were trained, here's this complex real world scenario. I'm going to make these simplifying assumptions about it. I'm going to plug it into this set of equations that was determined by some scientist 100 years ago. And I'm going to look at the number that comes out, and then I'm going to compare it to the number in the book. If my number is smaller than the number in the book, the design's good to go, no worries. If it's not, then I need to use a bigger beam or bigger sluice gate or whatever. So very prescriptive thinking. And in physics, it was very much more of, here's this complex real world scenario, here's everything you know, go do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
So much more open-ended.
Yeah, so they just teach you the dynamics, and it's up to you to apply it to the problem.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I remember there was some assignment we had in my steel design course where whatever. It's like this beam has already been installed. You need to check it to see if it's suitable. And there's an order in which you're supposed to check things for like web crippling, lateral torsional buckling, whatever order you're supposed to go through those things in. So I went through and I checked it for web crippling and it failed. It's like, all right, well, fine. You can weld some stiffeners on there and it'll be fine. Lateral torsional buckling, it failed. All right, fine. You can weld some stiffeners halfway down the beam. But by that time, that much field welding is going to be way too expensive. Just get rid of this and get a bigger beam.
Mm.
And so that's what I wrote on my assignment and turned it in. And the professor marked it wrong and said, well, you didn't do all these other checks. Well, why do I need to? The beam clearly is already insufficient. Why should I go through and do all these other checks? In that same semester, I took a physics course, and the question was, you've got a helium balloon tied to the gear shift in a car. Explain the dynamics of the balloon while the car's accelerating, which is a surprisingly difficult problem when you start breaking it down. And it's like, all right, the tension in the string, the gravity part of it, I know how to do that, so I'm going to work that out. How to deal with the acceleration in the car, I have no idea how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
But we know the equivalency principle. There's no difference between acceleration and gravity. So I can just turn that entire frame 90 degrees and just solve the gravity problem again. I know how to do that. So I did that, added, the two answers together at the end to get the superposition of it and submitted the exam. And then a week later, the professor graded it. He was going over the exam with us and he got to that problem. And he said, there are a couple of you guys that use the equivalency principle to solve this. I never even thought of it, but that's such a better way to solve it than the way I did it. So on one hand, I'm being chastised for trying to be more efficient, trying to do something in an easier, outside the box manner. And the other side, I'm being rewarded for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I declared a physics major. The long and short of that is, by that time, I was so close to the end of my engineering degree, I finished it also. It would have been silly not to at that point. But somewhere in there, I had to take a computer programming class, and I had no desire to do that. So I kicked it off to my senior year and finally took this like Comp Sci 101 or whatever, which was an introduction to Python, the programming language. And then it dawned on me, like, it took me a while to get it, but once it clicked. And then it dawned on me, like, I can use this to make my daily life so much better.
You started thinking in Python.
Yeah, I can use this as a tool to make my life easier. And I was looking at
not just for gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I did write a blackjack program in it that I was using to train before I went to the casino last time.
Well, Crystal's a huge blackjack fan, by the way. So,
well, I wouldn't say huge, but if I have to pick a table game, that's the one.
Yeah, that's about the only thing I'll play in the casino because I know I have a decent chance of doing okay on that.
And I have a few rules. It has to be a full table, and I have to have third base. Anyone at third base, I'm walking.
Yeah.
You get that down at the end that wants to split tens, forget about it.
Yeah, right.
There's a couple interesting things in that background I think it is worthwhile playing with here a bit on the AI. The first is you talked about this prescriptive method that you run a model, run a formula, and then check it against a known result, right? As opposed to an open-ended with the discussion with the beam where, why are we continuing to go through these steps when we've already established this is going to be a failure and it's cheaper? One of the things that strikes me about some of this AI stuff is AI is very susceptible to the data that's put in initially, right? So if you have bad data, you're going to get bad information out. And that's, where I've worked training these AI models, that's been where the failure has been, right? Is that the underlying data is flawed and that throws everything off. But it also gets to this issue about a certain reliance that's developed here for established supposedly scientific knowledge that once we know how to do something, that's the end of it. There's no other progress to be made, for the lack of a better term, right? Which seems to be what a lot of the problem we're having with this model building generally, not even if it's not AI based, right? But if we look at, Michael Crichton's argument about the global warming science. We had some of this with that University of London model early in COVID, where somebody got digging into the model and like, this is just crap, right? This guy's just making assumptions that don't match the real world. Where should we be telling people to say, okay, this is where the model ends and this is where the real world begins, and that model is just a simplified reflection of that real world, right?
Oh.
That's interesting.
It's a big philosophical question, but in my mind, it's huge.
Well, when I was still a part of Trinary Capital, that was a question I'd ask interviewees. Right? Like, you've got this wonderful resume of building all these mathematical models for the market. Where does the model end? What are the limitations of the model?
Yeah, and you have to know that because one of the things we're talking about when we're talking about the uses of the AI, like Crystal running a private business, and we're just getting bombarded with this AI stuff. Some of it is like, oh, we can use AI to help you guide your calendar. That might be useful, but it'd take me longer to learn the AI than any time I would save, from the calendar. Some of it, I just got one today on outreach, right? Oh, we'll help you do outreach by identifying these people. Well, if I can't identify specifically who I want to talk to for a particular project, because I know the type of people I'm talking to, and I get people that keep sending me these AI generated leads on, oh, we can help manage your HR for companies of 50
Yeah, I get
employees
those
or
too.
more. And I'm just like, I don't have 50 employees. I don't have an HR problem. And this is something that would just check on me for 10 seconds would know. But the AI's wasted far more of 10 seconds of my time deleting the emails every day.
I have the same questions, and I'm coming at it from that original question of what is intelligence. And actually, a few days ago, I was at a get together here in Vegas, and one of the attendees was a UNLV professor in computer science, and we got into a bit of I wouldn't say an argument because it was a happy discussion, but we took opposite sides on what intelligence is and what AI is, and he was describing to me that this, AI just takes in what's there and sort of regurgitates it. And he's like, that's not intelligence. But I was like, most people take in information and just regurgitate it as well. But when humans do it, we call it intelligence. So I'm really having a hard time, and I'm talking to really intelligent people trying to figure out the difference between a human's brain and AI. And it seems to me it's on a developmental pathway to be very intelligent.
And yeah, so let's look at some of the building blocks that go into where we're at for AI. So start with some really basic machine learning. And I will argue that this is machine learning, is you've got 3 data points and you want to fit a line to it. All right, so you use a least squares regression to figure out that best fit line. I will argue that's machine learning, and I guess unless you do it by hand, but if you put it in Excel or use a programming language to write that regression, you've given the machine data, the machine has looked at that data, and we'll use that data to make predictions. So something as simple as least squares regression is machine learning. Now, is that intelligent? Nobody would call that intelligence.
But I would say it looks exactly like what a parent does with a child. They're managing the inputs, and that is shaping how that brain comes out.
Yeah, my take's a little different on this because I actually think intelligence. Intelligence just isn't the sum of knowledge. First of all, I think that's one of the things that we've fallen into the trap, and this goes back to this earlier thing. The more stuff you know to get to a particular point doesn't make you sort of better suited to make a decision elsewhere, right? Again, COVID's a good example, right? Fauci doesn't understand anything about economics, and look what happens. But that being said, I think part of the problem is knowledge is only the start of wisdom, right? And the goal is to produce something different or more out of that knowledge. That's why I go on to this issue of creativity. Going back to your example, Crystal, of the parent and child. Yes, the parent is modeling behavior that the child presumably should follow, good or bad, right? A lot of good literature on abusive homes and that type of stuff. But at the same time, the hope and motivation behind it is that child takes those behaviors and eventually produces something more out of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's what marks the distinction in intelligence, right? The parent's never going to develop anything more out of repeating that word, right, constantly, which is an equivalent to machine learning. But
Yeah, they're still managing the inputs though. So like, let's say you have a parent that takes its 2-year-old to Disneyland versus a parent that takes their 2-year-old to like a porn theater. Like those inputs are going to create a different human being. And I'm struggling to see how the inputs we put into AI isn't doing the same exact thing.
Well, I think it's creating a different AI, certainly.
Thanks,
But
like
I'm,
I didn't sign up for this discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about the structure of the brain, right? Like, okay, that linear regression, maybe in like really early childhood development, maybe that's a reasonable analog. Like, learn what the letter A looks like, although even that's not done with linear regression. So that's a much, much simpler system than even a young child's brain. So
Mhm.
then the next building block to what we call AI now was a perceptron network, where you have these multiple inputs, you have all these different nodes with different weights, with different mathematical formulas connecting them. You get this big matrix that you multiply the input with, and you get an output data. And that can tell you whether the picture is a cat or a picture is a dog. And maybe that's more applicable to like what a child's brain is. But it's still dependent on the input, right? If I train it and tell it that this picture of a cat is clearly a goose, The AI is not going to know the difference.
Or the old joke about teaching kindergarten children their colors wrong,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
how you scar them for life. Can I do an off-color thing about porn? Because I think this is an interesting thing that's always got me about technology. Is one of the first things we tend to see historically
Hell of
whenever
an
a new
opener, Scott.
Oh, it is. It is. No, it's great. Anytime we see a new technology, porn's always the first to jump on it. So,
Mhm.
when printing starts, some of the first printed books, they print the Bible and then they immediately start printing smut stories, right? Photography comes out, the next day you get French postcards of nude women, right?
Yeah.
Movies come out, you get stag films, right? The internet comes out, you get porn sites. AI comes out, now you get the AI sex robots,
Yep.
right? The
Mhm.
companions. But that gets to an interesting. I mean, there's a philosophical question of why porn, but at the same time, this is actually one of the things that's starting to be a concern is whether these AI robots are actually accurate enough models for people who, particularly young teenagers who might be engaging with these AI sex bots and then carrying it over into a real world that doesn't operate the same way,
Mhm.
right? And that seems to be an interesting issue when you're controlling inputs, but it doesn't match how the real world actually works.
Yeah, and I'm kind of coming to an overall conclusion, just to put like a pretty bow on what you said. I think ultimately, whatever AI winds up becoming, it'll teach us so much about ourselves because it's a way to get outside of ourselves and analyze our behavior and what we're doing. And I'm very concerned about people developing relationships with AI, but there's no way to stop it. So I'm like, well, we're going to learn a lot about ourselves through this process. So there's a silver lining, I think, no matter what happens, because it is like every new technology winds up going to sex, but that is a way a lot of people process the world, and we're just kind of have to wait and see how this is going to end up.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important thing is that where AI is really going to be useful, and we haven't figured that out yet. I mean, we have a lot of promises, we have a lot of automation, which I think is fine, right? Um, but the stuff we really can't do is not where we see AI have really been effective, except and Crystal, if you excuse the geek out here over historical stuff, going back to these issues of pamphlet sets, which I know Hank has worked on. And if you don't know what that is, a pamphlet set, there's two different sort of meanings, but they're historical written documents. In some cases, particularly when we get into the Middle Ages, where parchment is so expensive, there might be something, an ancient Greek text that nobody thinks is important, and say, 1100 AD. So they scrape the ink off, right, and then rewrite something else of importance on it. Well, since the
Horrifying.
19, huh?
It's horrifying.
Well, it is horrifying. But in the 80s, we started to see a lot of technology that was able to read what was infaced, right? Now, what we're actually seeing is the other side of that, where we've got particularly ancient scrolls that are rolled up and are either too fragile or too damaged to unroll to read what's under them. So we have the technology to read the writing, but what we don't have is the ability to reconstruct what that imaging is showing us. And I know Anthracene has worked on this a bit.
We have. So there were scrolls from Pompeii
Mhm.
that have been completely burned through, but are still intact. So turned into charcoal or whatever, but still intact as scrolls. And these have been discovered, known about for hundreds of years, but nobody's been able to try to read them, and every attempt to read them has resulted in destruction of the artifact. What they've done is taken these scrolls and done x-rays of them and high resolution photography of them, CT scans of them, pretty much every non-destructive method of imaging you can do to them. And then I forget which organization was behind this, but they basically just turned it out as a challenge to the public with, I think, a reward of up to $1 million to anyone or any group that could decipher these. And they gave a lot of smaller rewards out along the way if like you cracked one part of it. And that was something that Anthracene worked on because we didn't really have a lot else going on then, and we needed some money. Um, but the area that we worked on was like, okay, we can get these images scrolls, but they're all burnt. How do you distinguish lines left from the remnants of ink versus those left from the remnants of fiber in the scrolls?
Nice.
And so one of our partners in Anthracene developed a way to go through and remove that background of paper fiber or papyrus fiber or whatever they were written on, so that you were only left with the characters written in ink or paint or whatever they use for that.
Oh my gosh, how cool is that? We should have led with that story, Hank. That's so awesome.
It's Yeah, it was a really neat project, and the work that Justin did on it, I mean, it's truly amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to line up all the different profiles of things it could be and wait for that image to come through and to actually get some writing out. Did you actually find, like, we're able to decipher something?
So we had such a, we're working on such a small part of that. Like we never read a whole scroll or whatever. And there were people who were working on other parts of it using AI and other techniques to how do we look at this blob and determine which letter it is and whatever.
You get like a part that says Jesus Christ's real name was. So that's like, dang it.
Yeah, right. So I don't know. We submitted our work to it, and hopefully that is being used to continue to read these.
Wow, that's really cool.
Well, that touches on the issue of get back to this interpretation of data the AI puts out, right? So it could say, okay, this shape is ink, this shape is fiber, background fiber. It can't tell you what that letter is, and going from there, what this means, so on and so forth. Hank and I have worked.
This ink creates this type of line, and it's like only this type of line used by this ink. So to follow that line and create the characters, that type of a deal.
Well, handwriting recognition was a huge early goal in
Mhm.
early AI that's been pretty well figured out by now.
Sorry,
Right.
my mind is. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Scott. My head's exploding over it. It's so cool. I'm thinking of all the ways to do it.
Well, there's ways to do it, but the point I was trying to make is at the end of the day, the best interpretation of the sum of the data is actually not the AI system, right? The best interpreter is the Mark One human, right?
Mhm.
Somebody who knows ancient Greek or Latin, sitting down there and saying, okay, I can see where this comprises these words and these characters, right? So it's in some ways not much different than what I did. Oh God, there was a shortage of paper in early 19th century France, so a lot of times like drafts of letters I was reading on these little pieces of paper, maybe 2 inches by 2 inches, right? A 4-page letter, you know. So it's the AI and the technology is being used to generate knowledge, but it's not being used to generate understanding or wisdom, right? And I think that's one of the issues we're dealing with. And I sort of wanted to go to this on another example. Crystal's interested in another discussion we had on census. But Hank and I actually worked on another interesting aspect of AI where somebody tried to use this AI system to prove election fraud uh,
Oh,
here in Elko County.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I
And
we had talked about the census, and so I was thinking, computation and modeling might be able to help us find more people. It was shocking to me that we really don't know. We don't have a good way of counting people in the country. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
shoot.
Well,
Yeah.
this AI system, I'm going to let Hank describe it because I mean, I was there when the initial presentation was done, and then one of our county commissioners asked Hank to investigate the AI model, and I actually had some data from some other research, so we ended up working together on this to fill it in, right?
This guy on voter fraud.
Well, it
Yes.
was, yeah. Go ahead, Hank.
Yeah. So this was done with ChatGPT. I think it would have been what version 3.0 back then.
And
Um, and ChatGPT is a general AI, right? It's not specialized for any one particular thing. It's meant to be able to converse with you and do the analysis that is learned from reading the internet, basically. There's some things it does really well. There's some things it does not do very well. Well, anyways, this user gave it voter data files. This was initially done out of Washoe County, and then I think another group did it with the same information from Elko County, and gave the chatbot this information, and then tried to do this like role playing thing with it, and said, "Hey, I want you to be like a top forensics mathematician. I want you to look at this data and tell me if you find fraud and this and that." And throughout this entire conversation, the AI, the chatbot, never did that. First of all, the chatbot said, "Okay, you want to analyze this information. This is the process you should follow." And then the user said, "No, I want you to do it. You're the expert. I want you to do it." And this kind of went back and forth until eventually the AI said, "Okay, well, here's a hypothetical example with hypothetical data that I'm applying these methods to. This is the result." That's like, yeah, you're 99.5% sure there's fraud. Well, unfortunately, this user then proceeded to report that as a fact representing the actual election, not the hypothetical example the chatbot had made.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that highlights a shortcoming or a danger of AI or a shortcoming and danger of people with an agenda trying to use a tool to further their agenda.
Mhm.
And you're going to see that with AI or not. In this particular case, AI made that a little bit easier.
Mhm.
Um, but what I found was interesting looking into that is that the AI got it wrong. The method the AI used seems like a reasonable approach that I would expect, maybe a junior studying mathematics to approach or a statistician to approach at that level. The problem is, in order to apply this method, there have to be certain conditions met, and this was what did it recommend? Using the binomial a binomial process to model the election. And there are several criteria that have to be met in order to do that. And because of different sizes and precincts, and because of possibly people from two different precincts talking, you violate independence. This is no longer a method that can be applied. So anyways, I went through, used some other methods for election analysis that I found in literature, just some mathematics and statistics that I know from my education are appropriate to this problem, and use that to paint a picture. And then Scott came in to help with some of the demographic information and explaining some of the things we saw through demographic shifts in the county.
Yeah, because one of the things we did is first the AI model they were using was utterly wrong. So they go up before a county commission claiming election fraud in a model that's fundamentally just wrong to begin with, right? And doesn't even do what they say. But since it's AI, it's smarter than us, and that was literally their argument. I mean, I'm sitting there in the county commission chambers, like, and what they were claiming that this showed was that there was an algorithm operating under the votes being counted. Right, that this analysis proved there was an algorithm. Right, sidestepping the thing, you're using a computer algorithm to show that there's an algorithm somewhere else. But what the result was is what we did is we did see a shift in a time series about how voting was done in Elko County, but that time shift tied to demographic shifts in the precincts that underline some formulas that are used in traditional election analysis, right? We could pinpoint when a demographic shift occurred that didn't align to new election laws, new election machinery, any of that stuff. But I think this is a real threat where you have people who don't really understand what they're doing, asking AI to do this high-end stuff, and then not even realizing that the fundamental basis of the AI is flawed.
Well, and
Right.
it's really charitable of you to say that it would be a misunderstanding. I'm very worried about the purposeful like you don't put in the right inputs in order to get the outcome that you want. And we're venturing further and further into a world where people aren't sure if the video they're watching is real. They're not sure if what consuming is real. And I do a lot of thinking about what that's going to do to the psychology of our people, but globally. I wonder if it's going to push people into stronger bonds with their local community because it's the only thing they can verify is real. That might be a positive outcome, but it's the misinformation thing, I think, is going to be our biggest challenge. And I don't think it's going to be on accident, Scott.
Well, it might. Go ahead, Hank.
Do you think there's some sociological equivalence there with the introduction of the internet? Because we had a similar problem then. I mean, how often were you told, don't believe everything you read online?
Yeah.
That's become the go-to source of information.
Yeah, and I think you're right to draw a parallel there. I would just say this is on steroids, just because human mind and visual images is far more powerful than like simple lies. I guess when you see a video created by AI, that's really hard for the human brain not to latch onto emotionally.
Yeah.
So the stakes have been upped, but I think you're right. It is the same thing. But again, we didn't overcome the challenge of the internet and we just doubled down. So
Well, I would actually argue it's much more complex in the sense that if you buy the evolutionary psychology model that humans are visually oriented to work in groups where trust is important. I think you're right, Crystal, that one possibility is these large scale models of trust, the state, the nation, the party, whatever, might be fracturing because people don't trust each other and they're going to trust their local community more eventually. That's a real possibility. But this thing in understanding knowledge, don't trust the internet. This has shown up every time some sort of knowledge distribution system has come up. Look how hard religious groups fought against printing, right? The huge thing in the Protestant Reformation is now everybody can read the Bible, particularly when it starts getting translated into vernacular languages. If you want a visual example, there's the famous story going back to Rome, where at one point Rome's getting so concerned about their slave population, a senator proposes we should have slaves wear distinctive clothing. And the other senators said, you can't do that because they're going to see how many of them there are, and then we'll have a real problem. Right.
yep.
So I don't think this is new, which is somewhat horrifying. But at the same time, human societies have found ways around this. And I think we're going to. That's why I'm not as worried about AI as Crystal is. Right. I
Yeah.
think we're going to find ways to incorporate this.
I do think in ways it will push us back together, which is a good thing, but I do feel like the red flag needs to be flown a little bit. You have multi-trillion-dollar companies with behavioral scientists and biochemists, and they know how to work you. And the thing that's startling to me, I don't know about you guys, but have you worked much with AIs? Just asking them questions?
Oh, just random? No.
They will flatter the heck out of you. And
Mhm.
the problem we have right now is people are desperately seeking validation, and these AIs are more than willing to give it all day long. And so my fear is people will be so comfortable with that that they'll refuse to believe anything the AI isn't feeding them.
Mhm.
And I'm like, whew. So I think it will be a divide. I think some of us will be like, yeah, I see through it. And some of us will be like, AI all the way, baby.
But, and this is an interesting thing to wrap up on since we have Hank here, because I think this is an important question. It's not going to be a traditional divide. One of the things that's emerging out of AI, I mean, here we are in Elko, Nevada, right? The city of Elko is probably about 24,000 people. We're 3.5 hours from everywhere, right? Salt Lake, Reno, Vegas, whatever. But we have an AI company. And we're dealing with these issues about local elections spurred by this AI content. There's a weird way where I think, is becoming a technology that, unlike the internet in its early stages, unlike computers in the early stages, doesn't seem to be restricted to like major research centers or the military, right? It's in a sense much more democratic. What do you think about that, Hank?
The AI that we see is,
Mm-hmm.
but and
Wow.
we've seen
Okay.
this,
Yeah, there probably is military AI we don't know
we've
about,
seen
but
this with every kind of technology for the last 50 years. But look at language translation technology,
hmm
how much better that's gotten in the last 20 years.
hmm
Gosh, yeah.
Um, but
But do you think crowdsourcing? I mean, what I'm trying to get to is before technology always started in these research centers and then spread out to the population. AI seems to be appearing everywhere all at once, right? So we have Reno, a city of 400,000 people, and Elko, a city of 24,000 people, undergoing the same sort of issues with AI and local elections,
Well,
right?
and my mom runs a city in Washington State, and they adopted an AI program that it seems like they're trying to train it right now, but they're trying to get it to help them manage the city more efficiently. So that's interesting. I imagine most cities are starting to adopt some sort of management AI.
hmm And it's sort of interesting, and we're talking about these rural urban divides and training it. I mean, could you imagine what the Elko County government administration would train an AI to do that might look different from what, say, the city of Henderson might train the AI to do, right? I think this is an unexplored field, and this AI dynamic is bridging these different real world situations.
well, and that's interesting because in that sense, it might be a better solution because you can train it on your needs, what your county has historically dealt with by somebody else's county.
Right.
And it's not just like a customizable software, it's something that can really adapt to your needs as it learns more about you. So yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Told my mom it's going to be an interesting interface when the federal government AI has a different idea about what their city AI, if the two have a conflicting parameters.
Well, and of course we already have that, right? But it goes back to the initial stuff because one thing I don't want to beat a dead horse, or since we're talking pamphlets, that's Vorpus Necron, right? Whipping a corpse in ancient Greek. But anyway, the census stuff. The biggest problem with the census is the census models that occur within the decennial census between the every 10 years that they use these models, and they seem to be horribly out of whack. And Crystal, you've argued that this is one where AI might work. My problem is, what's the data going to be based on? Because part of the reason these models are already out of whack is particularly for rural areas where the sampling sizes for the population estimates program or the American Community Survey or whatever the state demographer is using aren't large enough. So rural areas depend on 5 years of data, which means any model that's generated is going to be lagging in a way that information for cities is not, right?
I thought it was prime for AI because you can compare and contrast utilities, voter registration, DMV, school attendance, and you can kind of put together a more comprehensive picture of who's actually there. And
Mhm.
AI seems to be good at that sort of thing.
Well, that's possible, right? But at some point, it has to be put in the model, and that model isn't going to be generated by the AI, right? And that's one of the problems we have is that, somebody in Washington, D.C. constructs a model that's different than somebody in Carson City that's different from somebody in the city of Elko.
Saying it's
And
going to get interesting if the AI start conflicting.
right. And in some cases, we're seeing this confliction, we're talking 5, 8, 10% of population, which is a fairly huge margin of error in,
Yeah.
in some things, like, voting redistricting. right? So anyway, any final thoughts here, Hank?
No, I mean we're at a really exciting time because this is a burgeoning technology, and we get to be on the forefront of that, both as far as developing it and experiencing it, and um, kind of like living through the introduction of the internet or living through the introduction of the printing press or whatever. So it's going to affect us. It's going to change things. We just get to see how.
Yeah, and it's already changed things in my life and my work. Thank you again, Hank. Your work saved me so much money and time, and that was so great.
Good. I hope it was helpful for you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Good.
And so for everybody else, again, thank you, Hank, for joining us. If you have any questions or want to comment on us or join the conversation, or we can put you in connection with Hank, go ahead and shoot us an email at info@775alive.com. Until next time, I'm Scott Gavorski.
Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775.
Scott, Crystal, thank you.